Welcome to the Monitor Daily Podcast. Thanks for joining us. I'm Mark Sappenfield. A few months ago, our reporter Stacy Teicher Khadaroo stumbled upon something about her hometown of Buffalo, New York, that made her heart sink. 30 years ago, Stacy had attended an integrated school at the start of the city's efforts to desegregate. But now, the city's schools are once again segregated as they ever were. I sat down with Stacy in our studio in Boston to talk about what it was like to return home as a reporter. My first question: what was your experience with desegregation in Buffalo?
I always had a good feeling about this whole integration process because the narrative in my family was it was voluntary and it was happy, and it wasn't like in Boston where they were throwing rocks at the buses. But when I went back to talk to people who had lived the other side of this story, there were people throwing rocks at buses in parts of Buffalo that I never knew about.
And one of the good things of being a journalist is you do get to go look at things through different eyes. And in part of your story, you talk about driving around the town with Samuel Radford, who's an activist who has worked for integration.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about kind of how all these things to come together, and you're looking at it through your perspective, and then you get to see the world and the city and the school through his perspective.
Yeah.
What did you learn there?
I was so grateful that Sam spent hours with myself and Melanie, the photographer. And we started off at his childhood home, and we just, I was probably visiting that block of Buffalo for the first time in my life.
Right.
And just seeing it through his eyes and hearing what the other side of structural inequity looks like. It really, to me, it was just like to think about white privilege in a theoretical sense. It's something I've been aware of since my college years, at least, if not earlier. But to actually sort of put a name to it and to see it so personally. While I was getting on a bus and going to a school that was this gleaming new facility with all kinds of bells and whistles, the Magnet, he was getting on a bus a few years older than I was, and he was going into hostile territory. He was a Black student being bused into a white neighborhood, and his experience was totally different. Now, he does have a sense of educational benefit from that, and the research has shown that there was educational benefit for multiple generations because of desegregation.
Yes.
But he paid a price for it, and I never had to.
Right. And interestingly, your story has kind of tracked your experience and how that's changed over the years. You going there as a child and then kind of coming back as an adult. With you being able to do that with him, too, going to where he grew up and then kind of looking at things through his eyes, how has that narrative changed or not changed for him?
He went away for a little while after high school. I think he was in the military and college, and then he came back. So he's been there a lot more than I have. And he has been pushing all along. The story of discrimination, like in structural discrimination, the evidence of it in Buffalo is very strong. And he's been aware of that his whole life, multiple generations in his family. And so he sees himself, I think, in this long arc of pushing towards justice. And he's in it for the long haul, where he even shared with me about how talking with his wife and their own children's experiences in school, he really wanted them to be in the public school system because he had this legacy of, helping to integrate the public schools. But in the landscape now of choice and charters, and there's Catholic schools and there's private schools, when they had an opportunity to put some of their own children in a better situation, his wife finally kind of said, we have to do what's best for our children too. And he said, okay, we can do that, but we have to stay involved. Somebody has to be here for the rest of the kids.
Yes.
Like, he really has that sense of these are all our kids, and we can't just leave them behind by making individual choices to better our own children's educational experience and forget about the fact that in, half of the high schools here, half the kids aren't graduating.
Right. That's such a powerful idea that really resonates. And in just the short time that you had to parachute in there and see that, is that thought, do you see that percolating in society more broadly, or is it just kind of a few people out there who are kind of saying we need to think about this more holistically. We need to think about this as kind of the our kids sort of thing.
I definitely see it. And part of the reason is because I look for it,
Right.
but it's there. I mean, I can't, it's hard to say if it's always winning,
Right.
but there are lots of people out there with that spirit.
You very much felt as if your whole experience was very much enriched by being a part of this. How do you feel changed by having kind of gone through that experience?
The way I would sum it up is that I learned about people not through stereotype, racial, economic stereotype. I learned about people by knowing them.
Right.
You know, I knew them. I wasn't best friends with everybody. I crisscrossed some neighborhoods and not others. But I interacted with people on a level that for the rest of my life, you cannot tell me that stereotype about that group of people. I know those people. I mean, it's just that simple.
We want to give a quick thanks to our staff, including today's audio production team, Rebecca Asulin, Tori Silver, and Jeff Turton. Thanks also to Stacy Teicher Khadaroo for being a guest on the podcast today.
This report was produced by the Christian Science Monitor. Copyright 2018.